Hello, and welcome to another Behind the Poems story about poems from my recently released collection, Coffee and Paper Cuts. Today, I want to talk to you about a poem called Good Fences. Now, Good Fences is a homage to one of my favorite American poets, Robert Frost, because good fences make good neighbors became an idiom from his poem Mending Wall. Good fences as a concept can be multi-layered play on words, because what in fact makes a fence good? Is it good quality materials? Is it good for security? Is it good to keep things in? Is it good to keep things out? Good has so many different variations and so many different synonyms that it could mean just about anything. So from the title Good Fences, which I took as a concept from that good fences make good neighbors in the Mending Wall, I started to think about what we do with fences. Why do we build them? Why do we have them? Where did they come from, emotionally, psychologically? And because, as I have said in previous videos, all of these poems, or almost all of these poems, were written in the last couple of years, where I got a sense that everybody around me, including my students and my colleagues at work, we started to kind of isolate ourselves to protect ourselves, whether that was protect ourselves from loss when people would get sick, or when we started to protect ourselves and isolate ourselves because we couldn't be with each other. And it was easier to isolate ourselves than to fret and be upset about not being able to see each other. Some of that isolation is out of our control, but we also have a tendency to isolate ourselves to protect ourselves from what we can't control. Additionally, to the idea of an homage to Robert Frost, an homage to his statement in Mending Wall, I saw a photograph by a friend of mine named Simon Bailey. Now, Simon Bailey does a lot of really fantastic photographs, and I highly recommend you look up his Instagram photographs. But one of my favorite things about Simon's photographs is the light that he uses and how he plays with light and how his framing and composition of photos gets the best out of light. The illustration used with his permission is a photograph that he took of some power lines. When I saw the photograph, it further inspired me to play with this good fences idea, because the power lines are almost directly center in the photograph, dividing a cloudy gray sky. And there was something about that division and the black and white nature of the photograph that really kind of lent itself to that good fences idea. And whether or not electric power lines or lack thereof divide society from people who have electricity and people who don't. And this emotional appearance of that divided sky also reminded me quite a lot about the idea of good fences. And so I went from having the vague idea to homage that statement within Robert Frost's poem, to seeing the photograph, to sitting down at a break time duty in my school and watching the different ins and out groups of teenagers and how they separated themselves and isolated themselves, led to the poem Good Fences, and this idea that we build divisions, whether those divisions are physical realities or whether they're emotional barriers or distances that we keep people at arm's length. The line in Robert Frost, good fences make good neighbors, is ironic. It is obviously a statement where you're not really good neighbors if you are separating yourself from your neighbor. The more we divide ourselves, the more we separate ourselves from the person next to us, the more we put distance between us, the more we build fences between us, the worse neighbors we are. A border is something that separates, not something that combines. And so one of the things I explore within the poem Good Fences is that concept, is what good are fences to us? What materials do we build them out of? Why do we do it? And so whether those built fences are mesh through which we can see, wood, which are a little bit flimsy and can be easily knocked down or dismissed, or whether they are solid rock or concrete built one block at a time over time that it starts low, but as things get worse, we build it higher and higher to protect ourselves more. There was like a plethora of images and a plethora of ideas that all kind of converged on this idea of isolation and separation, which during that time was very important. When I did the first draft, I almost always do my first drafts by hand. And so between each verse, I wanted to draw a line in order to separate verse on verse, the same way the theme of the poem was people separating themselves from each other or separating ourselves from our true self. When I submitted the poem, it was a typed poem, so it was dashes along there because I couldn't quite figure out the formatting of the solid line between verses. I knew that my typesetter would be able to do that, or that my publisher would be able to do that in a kind of after the fact design feature. One of the early typesets, however, removed the lines entirely, and I had to ask the typesetter to put something in that imitated those lines, because obviously the visual effect of a line before and after all the verses was part of the poem itself. It wasn't just a formatting error or a typo. I wanted not just the words or the images the words create to show that separation, nor even the photograph that was included as an illustration of the poem to show that separation. I wanted a black and white bar of some kind, a solid line, some kind of thing that imitated the fence concept between verses to really, really hammer home that concept of the mending wall and the fence and the division between us and the division between ideas. So there's a lot that goes in there, and it came from several different places. And the first draft was written at school, sitting at a picnic table on duty, watching groups of teenagers reinforce that idea in the next generation. We have got to break down those walls and barriers. We have got to break down and get rid of those border concepts. That which divides us makes us weaker. That which, combines ourselves, that which, the more communities we build, the more voices and thoughts and ideas that we have together, the stronger we are. A lot of the work that's in Coffee and Paper Cuts was inspired by other poets. During the lockdown, we all started doing open mics online. And even now, when I go to an open mic online, I meet people from 12 different time zones. We order the open mic by what time zone somebody's in, because it's 3 a.m. when they're on the line with us in the UK. And so people's work, people that inspire me, are beyond fences. And the global phenomenon that this has started really needs to continue. It's one of those things that I really hope we don't lose as time passes and we start to forget what it was like to work so hard together to help more people survive. I know that's possibly a little waffly, a little rambly. I tend to ramble for my behind the poem stories. You either have noticed or you haven't, but if you haven't noticed, I wonder what you're paying attention to. But my behind the poem stories are rambly because a lot of times the poems that I'm explaining to you come from a variety of places. And Good Fences is a good example of that. It comes from at least 4 different sources over a long period of time. And I was really proud of it and really pleased with it. So I hope you enjoy the poem itself. And you can pick up the paperback, the audiobook, or the Kindle book and enjoy the poems that these stories tell you a little bit more about. Until then, thank you for listening, and I will talk to you next week about a new poem from Coffee and Paper Cuts. Good night.